Thanks, folks. Loved the presentation from the University of Toronto Scarborough folks. That was fantastic, and that work is awesome. I pull little bits and pieces out of that. We have a sort of a regional set of repositories we support for the community in the region. And I saw your note, Brandon, about ARCA. Maybe there's a national opportunity here around Islandora repositories and sharing infrastructure and support around that. The ARC service, I have always thought, as soon as I saw that should be a national service that any memory institution should be able to use. And it would be awesome if we could get sort of funding support from the new Digital Research Alliance in Canada. We should do that.
I'm in Donald.
Yeah. There you go. So I appreciate my colleagues with me here today, and Alan Stanley is also in the audience, and Alan Stanley did a lot of work on this project as well. And so I'll just get started. I'm going to use this keyboard. I'm going to use this keyboard. So the Islandora RDM platform is developing features and integrations with other services that provide a comprehensive research data management platform that's informed by the FAIR principles. And we basically organized our presentation based on the FAIR principles. The code for the project is available on GitHub through that link. The goal of the project is to create an out-of-the-box profile with configurable but sensible defaults for institutions wanting to curate and manage research data over its life cycle. Where possible, we've leveraged existing Drupal modules and/or community code, and in other cases have created new modules or code to support the goals of the platform. I should also acknowledge Rosie Lefebvre, if she's still in the room. There's Rosie. So Rosie and I work together on this project as well. One of the reasons we're using FAIR is that in Canada, our main research funders, the Tri-Agency, released a data research management policy in 2021 that included support for FAIR guiding principles for research data management and stewardship. And so we're doing our best to support So FAIR is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. To here, within our platform, findable. So the italicized bullets are what the FAIR guidelines are. So metadata are assigned globally unique identifier. So we do that through assigning a DataCite DOI. So we have a module that creates the DataCite DOI, sends that out or requests a DataCite DOI through DataCite Canada, and the metadata from our dataset is sent to DataCite. And once we get the DOI, we reflect that new DOI in the metadata of the research record. Data are described with rich metadata. Knowing that we would be interoperating with DataCite, they have a DataCite metadata schema, and we are basically aligning our model with the requirements of that schema. So reflecting the attributes within our metadata form. Capability of taking that set of Drupal fields and generating either Dublin Core or DataCite XML as required. The data is indexed in the platform itself. The XML is pushed out to be discoverable in search.datacite.org. It's made available to harvesters like Google Datasets. And Alexander did a bunch of work on the metatag module that he'll talk about. We also expose our metadata through OAI PMH. And there's a national data set harvester called FIRDER that harvests our metadata. By the identifier using standardized. Some of the FAIR principles, I'm going head scratching. What do these principles mean sometimes? So I'm looking at how other sites are adhering to the principles, what they're doing to make sure that they're aligned with the principles. So, for instance, our DOIs can be discovered in dimensions. DOIs have the ability to be searched within our own index. DOIs, OAI, and others are open standards that we're utilizing, and provides authentication and authorization, and we can also extend that. So when our site goes live, for instance, we'd want UPEI researchers to be able to authenticate using their UPEI credentials. Doing that. Metadata yesterday for the usathon, and we don't have a module or anything like that at the moment, but we do have sort of a commitment that once we create a DOI for a data set, we're going to maintain that data set metadata. We might update that to let folks know that whatever reason the binary files are no longer available, but here's the legacy metadata, and we removed things. Louder. Okay. So the platform supports the export and exposure of metadata in a variety of formats. So we use already embedded and that come with the platform. So JSON LD. We have a link to DataSite XML should folks want it. And again, we expose our metadata through harvester and in meta tags within the HTML of the record that people are looking at. The data uses vocabularies that follow FAIR principles. So Alexander developed a module called the linked data lookup field, and we are currently searching for headings, Australia's fields of research. Recently, we've moved from grid identifiers to RORs, and so Alexander's implemented that within the framework, and there as well. The data include qualified references to other metadata, so we have the ability to improve our metadata by either adding additional attributes or so the DataSite schema provides a lot of the basic information about a data set, along with a whole set of fields that we can leverage that can be very useful in describing the data. Data sets are very complicated. Typically, they're not just one object, but they're several. They could come with a data dictionary, other kinds of information about the data set, what was collected, and so on. And so just as an example, the description element can have multiple entries that include attributes that describe it as an abstract, methods, and so on. Right now, metadata are released with a clear and accessible data usage license. So we don't do this explicitly yet for the metadata we create, although we do
I'd like to hear you a little better.
Okay. license field taxonomy that folks can select from when they're doing data are associated with detailed provenance. We've got an Islandora event log. So each time something happens to a data set, there's a recorded transaction there. And right now, we need to meet domain relevant community standards. So we utilize Dublin Core data. Issues, then we can always Xander, it's your turn. Okay. You want to come closer? Sure. Microphone is right here in front of you.
Oh, great. Okay.
You got it.
So I'm on slide 9 here, according to mine. So I'm just going to talk about some of the technical decisions we made and give some explanations. And if people want to talk more about them at the end, I'm happy to stick around as long as people want. We kind of spearheaded the multi-file media initiative. This was something where we ended up, like, when a lot of data sets, as Donald mentioned, have several different files, say it might be like 10 different spreadsheets, or if it's an audio file, then it'll have a transcript attached to it. And theming, so there's a couple of things we ran into, like theming the player for an audio file, to have to like go to your parent and then get the list of media and then loop through all the taxonomy terms to find the correct related one. That ended up being like, from a theming perspective, just a lot of work. And from the perspective of an end user, if we want them to upload 10 spreadsheets, telling them to create 10 different objects and stuff, like from the usability perspective, it just wasn't something that we wanted to explain to a non-Drupal expert. So we decided, okay, like all the metadata is going to be basically the same for these files except for the file name. So it's okay to have a bunch of file fields on one media, and then we can, as a themer, for example, you can just like get the media and then get the file streams. And thanks to Alan, who did a lot of the work to make that work with derivative generation, so that you can tell a derivative to put the result of the derivative into the media from which it was created, but specify a field. So we're kind of coming back to Fedora 3's concept of data streams. And we're pretty happy with that, and we're glad that it's getting some uptake in the rest of the community. And of course, if you do want to have more metadata on like individual files, you still have this sort of default Islandora way to do that. And those work together pretty well. Next slide. We used paragraphs to implement the, Donald described the DataSite standard. So paragraphs has a lot of, or paragraphs gives you the ability to model complex metadata where something can repeat, things can have multiple fields that can repeat within each other, things can be nested. One of the biggest ones we had was you have a creator, which could be a person or an organization. And you can also have a contributor, which could also be a person or an organization or multiple. And then each of those have a role. So the person or organization thing was modeled inside of another paragraph, which contains that plus the role annotation. And it's a little awkward when doing data entry because you have to click add and then select the type. No one's really found a way around that yet. But it does give us the ability to directly map and have like real great flexibility and directly say, when DataState calls for this can have 1 to n numbers, then that's very easy to do. Paragraphs also works with the tokens. So for example, if you want to get the creator's name, you can use the token annotation like node : field creator : and then value. And we did a little bit to expose like a nice human readable value out of the token, which helps with the meta tag module. I should talk a little bit about schema.org meta tag. I'm getting a little bit out of the order of the slides, but that's okay.
You're in the right spot.
Yeah, so schema.org meta tag is a Drupal module that extends meta tag. Meta tag provides a lot of useful header information for crawlers to inform them of what's kind of in the site. And then schema.org provides that same information, but instead of individual link rel equals values, it provides it in a JSON LD format. But instead of having to define those JSON LD output in YML files with Islandora's way of doing it, we are using metatag schema.org module. And that gives a site builder the ability to do that within the UI of the site by adding, by default schema.org has many things like thing for sale or business hours. And like, so it's not just an academic standard, it's a standard put forth by Google and others to kind of make the web much more crawlable and much more semantic. And there is a schema.org dataset standard, which was not implemented by the default schema.org Drupal module. So I implemented that. It was a matter of defining some plugins, declaring that this creator is a name type or organization type, and it has all the annotations that follows that. So it worked very nicely with DataSite. And when you look at the header of a dataset object in the RDM site, you will see some JSON LD, and that includes what end up looking like blank nodes in RDF, where you have a creator, you have multiple of them, you have contributors, you have multiple of them. And as an experiment, I kind of threw that at the Fedora, at a Fedora 6 REST endpoint, and it wouldn't show up in the UI of Fedora. So I was a little disappointed, but then I just kind of did a request to get it back, and it was all there. It was kind of modeled inside Fedora. So in the future, I want to explore like actually putting that stuff into other places. But the nice thing about when you expose schema.org data like that, you don't have to be the linked data provider. You just say, hey, here's a bunch of data of mine, and then somebody else crawls you, and then you can be exposing your data in a semantic way without having to be the one to sort of administer and handle like a Wikidata query endpoint. So workflows, we had an idea that you would, as a researcher, you would be able to submit your files and data, but before hitting the publish button, we anticipated a role, and in larger libraries, you would have like explicit people doing these roles of data curator and metadata curator, and they would be the ones to like just judge like, okay, this meets all the requirements, the licenses, there's no copyright violation happening there. And Drupal provides a workflows module, which is normally intended for like newspaper editorial workflow. So, we implemented a new workflow without having to do any coding to just model this workflow as the sort of client wanted it to flow. And that was very easy, all doable in the UI. And then that goes along with the moderation in Drupal to make content unpublished until you decide that it's published. What we want to maybe be able to do more, and this is an Islandora larger problem, is if I unpublish a node, I want all of the media associated with it to also be unpublished. And so we don't have any automation for that yet. That is something I think all of Islandora needs to work on. What else? So we created a few microservices, if you want to advance the slide to that. Again, we are the ones who originated the FITS microservice, and thanks again to Alan. Alan did a lot of the kind of implementing stuff work for us, which was really great. We also have we're doing checksums, and what are the other things we had done?
Text extraction.
Oh yeah, text extractions for PDFs. That's another thing we just did the naive assumption of pulling text out of the PDF, and now I know Rosie especially is interested in doing more with like extracting OCR PDFs and making PDFAs. So hopefully we'll make some movement on that. We also have, Donald wanted to have a way to integrate with our university as a Microsoft customer very recently in the last year or so. So we now have access to Microsoft OneDrive. One of the places that we wanted to make use of that was as a storage backup endpoint for archiving data. So we used Mark Jordan's BAGIT module. And we had to iron out a few bugs in that, but we were pretty pleased with our ability to generated BAGIT of the values, put in like a use the premise module to add some extra metadata in there, and then plop it onto a directory on a Unix machine. And then I had like the hardest time trying to make open source things work that would like do a sync on from a folder up to OneDrive, and then like, oh, do we have to keep the whole thing on the client? And then someone named Tyler Dickinson from our ITSS department just showed me, hey, look, here's a PowerShell library. Maybe you can use this. And I was like, oh, PowerShell works on Ubuntu. So I taught myself PowerShell, and it's a very simple script that like uploads an individual file. And we don't have to keep copies. We don't have to worry about sync, which is horrible. So, just say upload it, and then it exists on the OneDrive, and you can delete it from your thing. And OneDrive is not a backup solution, because it's a sync and backup are two very different things. If you've ever sort of accidentally deleted a bunch of photos from your iCloud, you'll know that very intimately. So whenever we talk about OneDrive, it's not a backup system per se, but it is just another place where things can go. And I guess that's it for the technical side.
Oh, I would come in for the researcher experience. For the researcher experience side, I'm not the technical side, so I'm very grateful for all these people to be able to do all of that. So Donald mentioned logging in with UPEI credentials, and the way that our ITSS systems are set up, that it would be faculty that would be able to log in with their UPI credentials, but students would have to have manually created accounts. So they would contact me, and I would create an account for them. But once they log in, they are directed to a user dashboard, and this is what they would see. So we have a suite of services that they're able to use these, which is creating a data management plan and looking at their deposited objects. You can see that we have publish or archive my data. So publish would be making it public, archive would be unpublished. It would not be assigned a DOI until it is made public. There's also the ability to create data management plans, and you can share either of those objects. So your DMPs or your data objects that you're submitting, you can share those with people, and those are listed under your My Collaborations. And that's helpful for if somebody wants to start the deposit and then somebody else can come in and add some metadata that maybe the first person doesn't have, or maybe doesn't have time to finish the deposit, so other people can come in and do that process. So this is more of what the ingest form for a data management planning tool looks like. So it is based on the DataSite's template. Is it DataSite? Oh, Digital Curation Center. It's the Digital Curation Center's template for DMPs. And as you can see, some of the fields do have asterisks for the required fields. Not all of them are required. So once they create or they finish up their project details, the other place that they're going to put most of their information is the Write Plan tab. That's where we ask several questions under each of the categories that's on this slide. So these are just the general categories, but they aren't the specific. There are specific questions that we ask that fall within these categories. And if we have time, I think we're going to demonstrate the development site, so we can look at those questions if there's interest.
We know that there is a national DMP tool that folks can use. We use this sort of as a lost leader, basically to connect with researchers on campus, as one of the first conversations we have around one of their projects, and ensuring that they've got a data management plan. So they may use this tool or they may use the national tool. It all depends on what the need is. But it's just a way to connect with faculty.
Yeah, and offer all of these services in one platform, so they're not going to all the individual places. They're welcome to do that if they like, but this is a local system and where everything is in one place. So for publish and archive data, this is a portion of the ingest form, and it has several sections. Again, some of them are required fields while others are not. And just to reiterate that archive is unpublished data, and it is only viewable to the user once they're logged in. It is not available to the public. one of the features that I thought was really cool was that we could, for the creators or the contributors, there is an ability to put in identifiers, so like ORCID or researcher ID from Scopus, that kind of thing. So that was one of the features that I really liked to see. So this is what a data set record looks like. Anybody visiting the website can look at all of data sets that are published. This is an example of what a record would look like, and we do have the link on here. So if you wanted to visit this and look at it, and this was a data set from PEI that I just stuck in there. So it's not a complete record. It's just got some of the fields completed, and you can see that you can download the files there. But this is what it would look like. All right, and so some future development ideas that we had include policies and procedures. So this is really, I think, one of the areas that I have a lot of work to do before we launch and migrate our data platform onto this one. We applied to be part of a cohort that was wanting to complete Core Trust Seal certification for their repository. And in part of that process, you have to really point to a lot of core policies and procedures and documentation. And so that's when I really realized, we have a lot missing there. Some of the things are like a preservation plan that includes like continuing a system of governance, documentation on long-term preservation. And I know that Islandora does have a lot of that stuff that's built into it, but they want that information to be public for users whenever they come to the site. So, getting that all into one place and making it visible to people using the website is part of that process. So that work is ongoing, and hopefully we'll be able to, apply for that Core Trust Seal eventually. We just have some work to get before we get there. And then some of the UI improvements that I wanted to do probably are related more to like theming changes. So we had a co-op student last summer who worked with Rob Drew and implemented a theme, and he did a lot of work in getting all the content over to this site from our current site. But there's still some things that I want to go back and change, and most of it's related to like theming, and so it's not necessarily functional, but it's nice for the user to see a nice site. So those are my ideas for the improvements, but the others I will leave up to Alexander and Donald.
Speak from stage right. Automate the BAGIT to OneDrive workflow. So right now it's a manual process. Alexander, would you agree with that?
It's a button, so
Yeah.
like it's like up to the discretion of the owner when to do it. So yeah.
So that's using, again, Mark Jordan, a very prolific developer, his Islandora BAGIT integration module. The other thing we're looking at is seeking to improve premise. Want to speak to that, Alexander?
Yeah, sure.
Come
So premise right now, the premise module just does a pretty basic job of translating some of the basic metadata fields into the premise turtle format. But if you actually look at premise as a specification and what its goals are, it wants to be able to be like the point of truth for what happened to this data set, when this data set was added by whom, and so none of that is currently available in premise. So we're kind of telling a white lie when we say we support premise. What we did to support logging, we use a Drupal module called events log, and it kind of redirects the watchdog output into a more permanent set of tables where you can query them by user, by node, so you can get a list of all the operations that were done on a node by which users. And that plus the revisions, which we integrate with revisions thanks to workflow. And users can add a revision log whenever they modify the nodes. So a thing we should do, and I would like to see done, is somehow funnel that into the premise format as well, just so that we are doing a little better job of adhering to that standard.
One of the other pieces is just because we've gone through several I'll call it reinstalls, migrations over and over again. We need more documentation around configuration. So you get the code, but as soon as you start digging into it, you'll find very quickly that there are a fair amount of configurations that are needed, and ensuring this module is enabled and turned on, for example, that we've got this appropriate config. So again, we've just gone through another sort of migration and some updates, and there are bits and pieces that are missing. And so I'm going, okay, where did this block go that used to be there? So I think we just need to fine tune that and document it for those that are implementing it. Alexander?
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, I was talking about kind of the line between what we publish. We have a GitHub repository called Islandora RDM, and that can be installed on top of an Islandora base install. Just do composer require Islandora-RDM/Islandora under RDM. And that will, as of Drupal 9.3-ish, that still works and that still installs. And a lot of the stuff that we built into the functionality, like the workflow support and the data site formats, all the paragraphs and all that, that is contained within that. But the other thing that happened when they were working on sites was like adding content, adding blocks. And that can't be captured as easily in an exported config. So this is just kind of like, how do we implement like config splitting and content config sync and all that when moving between development sites, and how do we do that along with publishing something that's useful to other people that does contain like the core functionality that we implemented.
We're not going to do a demo. Go ahead.
Track or events logger?
Events logger, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
We can check the module listing we've got on the site as well.
I haven't heard of that event log track. Is that something new? Does it support 999? That might be worth looking at.
It looks like it's D10 ready.
Oh.
It was released 24th July 2022.
Oh, dang. All right. That might be useful.
So it seems.
On up.
Oh, come on. Well, I wanted to ask.
It will save me from having to repeat it.
Yeah.
I see you don't want to listen.
You're one of the few people here who can actually project here. So
that doesn't really help from on the online, because you really have to get behind the microphone.
Oh, about
the other
now.
side is- Okay, well, that's
Okay,
pretty good
okay,
because you're
okay.
close enough.
blow out Carrie's eardrums. Do it. He's doing it to us.
That's a tough challenge.
You're really missing an opportunity to say some really funny things because it's like a booming voice in the room. Hello, how about now? Okay. Alex. I hear what you're saying about premise. I think that DDI is kind of like that too, like those totalizing metadata. But it sounds like we have all the data we need for a premise record. It's just, is this just a configuration thing? Like where we need to make a view and then export the
It's
format?
more premise as a module is just a very small piece of code that pulls out a few fields and then transforms it to turtle. So you'd want to make like some hooks or a plugin system for that to be able to inject more stuff into it.
Okay. That was
So-
most of my, like,
Right now, that module doesn't capture any of the events, for example, which are core to premise.
but you could get that out in a view, right?
It could, but you need to transform it into the premise format.
So that would be, that's the thing, is like, so we could get all the data into a view, then we can, that's configurable. Anyways, I was just thinking, that's a use-a-thon lost opportunity. I feel like we could have collaborated on that, but it seems like we're really close to premise. And thank you for doing the multimedia thing, the multi-file media thing. That was really important to us. So that's all. Thank you for the presentation.
Nat had a question. Just as Nat's coming, the dashboard is actually a set of views that are embedded on the Okay.
It's a technical question as well. I'm interested in your use of paragraphs. Are you able to batch ingest paragraphs? One question. The second question is, are you serializing the paragraphs information into JSON LD?
Okay.
Come closer.
Yeah. So we have not. We don't have a batch ingest system for RDM right now. But if you wanted to do batch ingest, I've been doing some experiments with JSON LD, and it supports paragraphs. You have to like explicitly say add this paragraph, but it's fully supported. If I've been sort of impressed with Islandora Workbench and the fact that it generates derivatives as you put things in. So adding support for that would be something we'd need to do, but it wouldn't be very difficult. You work with paragraphs in much the same way as you work with other, like Islandora speaks taxonomy terms, and the way you get a taxonomy term and pull out its value is basically exactly the same as you do with a paragraph. It's just an entity reference. I've evangelized it with paragraphs before. The thing that is nice about paragraphs is what it really is underneath paragraphs is a module called entity reference revisions. And that means if you alter something that lives in a paragraph, that makes a new revision on the node. And that's not true if you're altering something that is a taxonomy term that the original node references. So it's a little tighter integration. And in terms of serializing output, I spoke about that in the JSON LD output that we made using the schema.org meta tag module, and it happily traverses paragraphs because tokens understands paragraphs, and you can get into a paragraph using the colon notation.
Thanks. Maybe another sort of related question. Well, not related, but what is the size of the sort of research data that you are able to ingest right now?
So we tested, the biggest one we tested was a few gigabytes. We wanted to go higher than the like default PHP like 2 gig limits to make sure all that worked. So we tried something that was about 9 gigs. That blew up our Fedora at one point because we were using a module called TUS, which was supposed to be help you upload things. But because TUS was uploading into a field that was owned by a Fly system, its fragmentation put everything into Fedora, and that got stuck there. So that blew up our like 200 gig storage. And it's supposed to clean itself up, but you know, when your disk drive is full, everything doesn't work. So we dropped TUS for that reason. If we want to, we'll kind of have to think about how to deal with uploading very large files from an end user perspective. That TUS was going to work with that, and maybe we should work with that, just like separate it out from Fly system is probably a better approach. But the rest of the stack, Alan did some debugging work on making the video processing not completely die. Microservices, from an architectural point of view, is not the best way to handle very large files and processing them. So if we had a higher, we don't get that many data sets at UPEI. If we were at an institution that was getting like much more data input, I would strongly want to move away from microservices for some data processing. But other than that, we seem to be able to handle pretty large data sets.
We looked at a bunch of different potential solutions, integrations. We had a brief integration with Globus, but it requires payment, and we were not members of Globus. They gave us a sort of a test site to try an integration. We looked at other modules as well, and maybe there's an opportunity to sort of do a referenced URL field wherever that sits. So I can imagine, you know, it seems like our OneDrive storage is unlimited. So I'm just going, put a huge file there, you know, let the cloud manage that and point to the URL, and as long as it's available, we'd be able to download it.
Work is because you could push us to the Drupal private system, and I had written a module that, based on various conditions, allowed it to automatically just move it to Fly system after it was completed. This was mostly done when I was dealing with permissions, moving files between private and Fedora and public, but it could easily have been extended to, once the file's there, after TUS uploads it to the Drupal private into Fedora.
Can you guys spell TUS?
TUS.
TUS, thank you.
So just for the benefit of the microphone, Seth just said something that sort of agrees with my assumption, which was if we do want to use TUS, it's mostly a matter of separating it out from Fly system, and you put it in possibly like in the Drupal private files.
Where is TUS?
The Drupal module.
Brian?
Everybody?
Yep. Thanks, folks.